Now, I'm not going to tell you how to do the whole thing, about how to write an interesting story. That's a whole other video. But I will tell you a secret about writing. Readers, players, viewers only care about two things in the whole wide world: themselves and the things they personally care about. If a human doesn't like you and you aren't them, they don't really care what you do with your time. Humans are horrible creatures, by the way, which coincidentally is about 90% of literature. We're still a lot better than ducks, though. Those guys are assholes. And their penises are they're corkscrews that fire like pistols into lady ducks. Sometimes other boy ducks. Even if they're dead. Especially if they're dead. Anyway. So, if you want people to be invested in your story, you can do one of two things. Make something specifically about them, or get them to like the characters in your story. After that, they'll find their own reasons to like your writing. I've written things myself that people have told me they've enjoyed because one of the characters reminded them of a relative, or because it involved the military and they're enlisted, or because the character I drew totally looks like their favorite pet, or so on. You can't anticipate any of that, unless you're writing for a very specific audience. If it happens, it happens. In consequence, our only option in writing our horror classic is to make our characters likable and our environments and characters fascinating. And if you didn't guess, making anything in a setting meant to disgust and horrify people attractive? That's pretty hard. It's difficult to find time in between our characters fighting grotesque nightmare engines born from the deepest reaches of the sublime underbelly of reality's most intricate folds, just to have them act like it's fucking Family Matters. I sure would like to go grab a burger and shake with Missy, but I've got to battle with some dying giant fetus beast that slightly resembles the son my wife and I aborted into the third trimester when we were both too young to cope with the reality of being parents. But you've got to find time for that burger, and especially for the shake. Because if you don't, when Missy bursts her own fetus beast out of the wound she got when she was molested by her stepmother's boyfriend, it won't mean anything. And we don't want that, do we? And I will tell you now, no amount of tragic backstory has ever made anyone like anyone else ever. It can make us sympathetic, but that's not the same as liking someone. This is recognizing that they've been through some rough shit. It doesn't matter how many times you have your character raped, it doesn't matter how many of their parents you have murdered, it doesn't matter if you have every plane that they've ever traveled on crash into the mountains, and they have to eat their whole family to survive, which renders this girl unable to birth children for the rest of her life. Also, she was born without any limbs, hair, eyes, ears, or mouth. In fact, she's just a torso with a brainstem. Oh, that's so tragic. But put that character next to Clementine from The Walking Dead, people will pick the adorable little girl over the ultra victim every time. She used a salt lick and then denied it. That's adorable. Fuck this tragic ball of meat. You get no sympathy from me. See? So you can't just treat your characters like crap throughout the horrible story that you've made up and expect people to care. They won't. You have to find the time to give your characters a personality before you start ruining their lives. This is why so many games fail. Their protagonists are flat, boring people with nothing interesting to say. They're just there to mumble about monsters, scream at shadows, and then hug a crazy lady at the end because the writer treats them as a means to the end of revealing a story that no one ever cared about because the player doesn't care about the characters that are supposed to be creating the story. It's basic shit, people. We ain't into logic deep bicicleta yet, motherfuckers. Did you know animals and even environments can also be characters? It's true. And that the viewer's attraction to them should be just as important as the human characters? How can I like an animal as a person, you may ask? Well, you can do it. If you ever heard someone describe some rickety piece of crap furniture or a rock or a mangy old sexy mouse as having personality, you know what I'm talking about. It's so weird looking visually that personification or pareidolia or whatever takes over, and our brains treat them as things with an identity. You can handle random crap lying around just the same as you can handle your human characters. They should have as much subtlety and likability as your people. Which brings us to our last item, freaking the shit out of you. It's horror. You can have subtlety, conveyance, and fascinating characters and environments, but if you're not scaring the shit out of people, it ain't horror. You may be wondering, why is horror better at conveying some ideas than something else? Why not just make our story straight drama? Well, basically, when creating narrative themes, it's best to choose to convey the emotional states most parallel to those things. That's fancy talk, for if your story is about how dark the human soul is, you need people to feel freaked out just all the time. That said, how do we freak people out? Let's take a look at fear itself. One interesting thing about fear is that there are no completely native fears. Everything in the whole wide world people are afraid of is learned, usually in childhood. People have certain predispositions to fear certain things, of course, but they're all learned. Heights, intimacy, dying, snakes, failure, spiders, being confined, tiny brown girls, and public speaking. You can even teach people to be terrified of cotton, really. Look it up. Look up the little Albert experiment sometime. They conditioned a kid to be afraid of white lab rats. By association, he was afraid of anything that was white and fuzzy. It's wired into humans to be just as potentially afraid of something as we are curious. You can teach people to be afraid of anything, if you punish them enough. So, we have two options. We can either play upon common existing fears or create new fears. Now remember that horror is about subtlety, misdirection, and being confused about what it is that you're looking at. So if you want to use a fear like rats or spiders, don't just show a giant spider. Use elements from the spider. When someone sees a large mass of spindly appendages steepling through the rubble of a half-destroyed church, the thing that pulls itself over the horizon should be so disfigured and horrible looking that your first reaction isn't, oh, a spider monster of some kind. It's, what is that? Trying to nail the design of creatures or environments like that is really, really hard. Give a lot of credit to people that can make unique, generally disturbing monsters because it's not easy. It's not easy at all. The thing about using existing fears is that they don't have to be literal. Rat monster, cockroach monster, whatever. Let's talk adultery monster. Insecurity about commitment monster. Now the problem here gets even worse, because not only are you having to personify a concept, then change it into a monster or a person or an object that embodies that idea, but you also have to make it obvious enough that it can convey that concept, while ambiguous enough that it's still visually unsettling, confusing, and subtle enough to engage the audience. And that's hard. It's very hard. So let's just make a man with a scary demon head. I have pointy teeth and my eyes are red. Are you scared? No. That's stupid. No, I'm obviously speaking more about games with this. With literature, usually you're not going to be able to convey things as well using visuals without giving away the idea, since you're spending a whole paragraph trying to overly detail your concept. It defeats the purpose of disorienting the reader anyways. Usually, you'll want less elaborate visual concept in prose in favor of using narration to marry ideas to one another so that the reader is doing the work for you. You can't do that in a game or a movie, so it's up to you to convey the subtlety in design. There's no real rule for this. You just have to be a good designer and know how far is too far. And you also need an art director and a producer that will let you do your job, instead of demanding stupid changes that they don't know a thing about. Which happens to be a big problem in conceptual design, if you couldn't guess. But generally, I will tell you, don't use conventional anatomy at all. Remember our rule. People need to be able to look at it and not be able to figure out what it is. This doesn't mean design a guy who has legs for a head. It's obviously a guy with legs for a head. It also doesn't mean it's okay to design a dog made of butterflies. It's still visually a dog. Changing technicalities about the design doesn't alter its reception by the audience. They don't care about your sputtering words regarding the intricacies of why it's not a dog. If they see a dog, it's a fucking dog. And it's your fault for drawing a dog. Having a dog with no skin or a head that opens like a zipper doesn't make it not a dog. It's just a dog. And unless the player is specifically afraid of them, it's not scary. It's just a pathetic attempt to differentiate enemy types by using something with an easily replicated animation. Now I know modeling and animating, it's difficult. and it's cost effective and it's efficient to just reuse skeletons from the human models, or overlay the animation process off of a real animal that someone videotaped somewhere. But if you're going to do horror, do it correctly. Otherwise the whole effort just falls apart, and you get made fun of on the internet. That said, the human brain is programmed to try to make sense of things. So if you show your design to 1 million people, at least one of them is going to see a spoon, even if you drew a vampire. So don't get discouraged just because someone leaves you an angry YouTube comment while he was shitting on the toilet. Fuck that dumbass. You hear that? Fuck you. You know who you are.
Fuck you. Suck my dick, bitch. Oh, scandalous ass doo-doo dog breath smoke.